go ahead and get started. I'm Chip Craig. I'm the chair of the Star Alliance, and we need to talk about my term length, by the way. I was thinking I've been doing this 2 years. But we have the pleasure of having Scott with us, who I'll introduce in a second. And then we're going to have committee reports, kind of current events. We're going to talk a little bit about some stats. Mark's going to give us some stats on the area. If Scott's not going to talk about it, I have the VRMet National Housing Study that was just done. That's interesting. And then we're going to talk about maybe doing some data collection. But first, we'll kick it off with Scott, who's nice enough, Scott Leggett. He is a legend in this industry in the short-term space. He is currently the Director of Government Affairs for Inhabit. And Inhabit is a company that owns 4 or 5, 8 different companies, software companies, web companies. Prominent player in the short-term rental field. Prior to that, he was the CEO of LSI, which is another business that was in this area. He's currently the co-chair of the Firma Affairs Committee. And he has been the senior manager of Outer Beaches Realty and Seaside Vacations. And he really is a legend in the industry. I had the pleasure of hearing Scott a month ago, September, a couple months ago, in a conference in Virginia. And what he has said, I thought would be really helpful for this committee to hear. He's been active throughout the country with groups like us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk to us a little bit. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time today. Chip asked me kind of to give you a bit of a state of the nation, if you will, on the regulatory climate for short-term rentals, which I wish I could say we're winning this battle, but the fact is we really aren't. I compare it to the Greek mythological creature, the Hydra, where every time they cut off one head, 2 more grow. That's kind of what we're seeing in the regulatory arena. Right now, I honestly don't think I could name a state that doesn't have some significant regulatory initiatives there. And it is proliferating in some ways, just almost ridiculously so. The week before last, I got calls from 5 different ski towns in Colorado, towns that are iconic as far as the tourism industry is concerned, and almost were right there in the beginning when short-term rentals began, and they're significant parts of each of those communities. And in every one of them, they're attempting to regulate in some very aggressive ways. The latest thing is to charge short-term rentals what they're calling a mitigation fee to help with affordable housing. Nothing could be certainly a better cause than helping with affordable housing. But in these instances, they're putting the entire burden on short-term rentals. And in addition to their licensing, their lodging taxes, and other fees that they pay to the towns and counties, they are now have enacted or proposed between $2,000 to $800 per bedroom annual fee to renew licenses. So it's getting worse rather than better in terms of numbers. Again, I don't know of a state in the country that isn't dealing with these this kind of legislation. North Carolina, ironically, and I know Asheville has had some issues, but compared to the rest of the states, we're fairly quiet, and I attribute that, quite honestly, to the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act, which I used to just hate when I was property manager in the Outer Banks. At the same time, I now acknowledge that it has really kept the industry clean in North Carolina, and we don't see the number of consumer complaints here that often spurs some of these regulations. So just to share a few of the themes that I see that are recurrent across the country, affordable housing may be the number one. There is a false narrative that affordable housing is the lack of affordable housing is attributable to short-term rentals. That's kind of a red herring. In some ways, it may seem intuitive that could be a big cause of it, but the fact is it isn't. The VRMA has commissioned several affordable housing studies from very reputable research firms, and what we're finding is the real causes of affordable housing are the cost of borrowing, the cost of money, the cost of land, cost of building materials, cost of labor, other factors, simply just choice by developers that they make more profit off of larger and more expensive homes that don't even fit the affordable housing definition. And in most cases, short-term rentals are owned by people who want to some personal use in those homes. They're not looking to put them into a long-term housing stock because they want their own time there. And quite honestly, they don't want the hassle that goes with long-term renters often. And by definition, most of them don't fit the definition of being affordable. So it's that probably is the most recurring theme that I see. But among those, other things are complaints about short-term rentals impacting the character of towns and villages, that they don't have the same quality of life or character. Again, these are often just ruses. The short-term rentals tend to keep these towns vibrant. They tend to keep the commercial districts healthy and fuel not just the economy, but often the culture of the towns and cities, because the entertainment, the festivals, and that are deliberately intended to attract the renters of short-term properties. Other things that I'm seeing are caps being put on the number of licenses issued in towns. Rezoning is a big theme, where we see initiatives to rezone what are currently residential properties to commercial properties, with lots of implications there, including charging them a commercial tax, property tax rate rather than residential, and also code compliance for commercial code, so that some of the properties would have to put in fire suppression systems, be ADA compliant, have second-story egresses, etc. And in most instances, that would price someone out from even continuing a property in short-term rentals. I'm also seeing that the regulations are coming from a lot of different directions. Most people think these are going to be initiated in their town council or county commissioners. Often they are not. They're done administratively. They could be done by building inspectors, code compliance officers. In one case, in Branson, Missouri, an elected county assessor has decided that short-term rentals should be assessed as commercial properties, and is more than doubling the values and the rates that they have to pay for county taxes. So these are coming from a lot of different directions, and not just the traditional pattern that we used to see, where a town council might have a grievance or whatever, and sometimes, quite honestly, there's a lot of legitimacy to when these grievances are initiated, and I'll circle around to that in just a moment. So what's behind this is a good question, and there are several factors pushing the anti short-term rental initiatives that we see. Among them are the hotel motel lobby, which may have experienced the biggest business disruption that any of us have seen in our lifetimes. We think of typically technology having been the big business disruptors, but the fact is hotels and motels have existed pretty much unchallenged for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden there's this movement toward to a sharing economy and short-term rentals that has completely disrupted their model, because we now have more inventory, more bedrooms in short-term rentals than all the hotel, motel rooms across the world. So, and that just happened exceptionally quickly. And what we find is that the hotel, motel, and other hospitality sectors have for years cultivated their relationships with politicians. They've done it wisely. They have a large war chest to influence regulations, and that the help them go their way. And we're a lot more fragmented as an industry, a lot less organized, a lot more immature in terms of how we've evolved to represent ourselves. So they're a very formidable group, and oftentimes they're in the shadows, they're in the backgrounds, and supporting people who don't even realize that they're surrogates for that group. Other groups are just, as I mentioned earlier, people who are concerned about the character of the town. Some of them, interestingly enough, almost every locality that contacts me and says that we're having trouble or we're having regulations proposed, and then they describe the opponents, and often the opponents were people who owned a vacation home in that community and decided to retire there. They were happy with the vacation homes previously, but now that they're retired, they don't want them around them. So there's a lot of that going on. There's the typical not in my backyard, the NIMBYs that are opposed to short-term rentals. And when property managers ask me what can they do, my advice to them first is to do exactly what you've done: build a local alliance. Make sure you have a seat at the table. I have a good friend, and I'm sure you've all heard the quote, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And that's often the case that we find that we have not cultivated the relationships that other groups and other constituencies have. And so often when a regulation occurs, we're behind the curve, and we haven't built the relationships on town councils. We haven't built the relationships within business organizations. We haven't made ourselves the go-to experts about our businesses. And so the first thing, again, I suggest our push is building a local alliance and with a foundation of professionalism and citizenship. We don't want to be a problem. We want to be part of the solution. We want to contribute to the quality of life in the community. We want to operate in a fair business environment, but also, we're prepared to pay our part too. So if I get a call and someone says, hey, they're going to start making us pay lodging taxes. And I had a call a couple of weeks ago, again from Branson, Missouri, saying, hey, they want us to start paying lodging taxes just like the hotels and motels. And I say, you're talking to the wrong person. We should be paying those. Other businesses are required to do that. Why should we get a free pass? When people call and say, well, they want us to get business licenses. Of course they do. Everybody should. If you're in business, you should have business licenses, and you should be part of the business community and the greater community. And we should be listening to the complaints that kind of spur some of the anti-short-term rentals, whether it's nuisance complaints, parking complaints. We need to be part of the solution and enforce our own rules. So, a good citizenship and involvement are the key ingredients to keep regulation from really getting a stronghold in a community. And what I'd also share is I'd say roughly 70 to 80% of the calls I get are almost so far along in the process that, we've already given up too much ground to win the fight. In other words, someone will call me and say, hey, we got a new regulation and second reading is next Tuesday. What can we do about it? They weren't involved in the process in the beginning. They didn't pay attention, didn't keep aware that things were at risk. And the other common denominator I find is that, a lot of us didn't listen during our high school civics classes, so we don't even know how laws and regulations are made. They don't know the different routes that things can go. Things can happen administratively. They can happen through a referendum. They can happen through a regulation being passed through town council, but they don't know the process. And so things are often so far along that it's very difficult to influence them. The other common denominator that I find is that towns and cities have their own associations and affiliations they belong to, both state and nationally. Often they're based on the size of the community, but they have their conferences and they discuss, and they have their publications and they discuss issues and that. And so oftentimes we find that a regulation that we may have seen in Oregon is all of a sudden popping up in Georgia, almost with the same language. And it's simply because of those kind of copycat regulations, and someone saying, well, here's what we did about this problem, or here's how we raised money for affordable housing. And they copy off what is often bad regulation, and it proliferates because we I think as citizens of communities, we often assume that our town councils and commissioners are legal authorities, and they're not. Oftentimes, the legislation and the regulation they write are not sustainable, and oftentimes exceed their authority. But someone else did it, so they do it, and if they're not challenged on it, it becomes law in their towns. So there's let's see, I'm looking for some of these other themes here. Just a quick story. In one town in California, one of the requirements was that, and we see this often, and I think that part of this is quite fair. They want somebody that if there is a problem in a home, whether it's noise or whether it's an emergency, a fire or whatever, they want a number connected to that house that can be at the property within 1 hour. I think that's a fair and good regulation. They also, in some towns, and this one in California, required every short-term rental to have a sign prominently placed on the property with a phone number, that if there was a nuisance complaint, someone could call that number, and somebody at the town administration would answer it and take the complaint. But because those are public records, we checked to see what we wanted to see is what the nature of the complaints were. What we found is out of over 1,000 calls, only a dozen of them were about actual complaints. The rest of them were from people wanting to know how they could rent that property. So there's a lot of, and I have to assume that people in government are sincerely trying to solve a problem, but more often than not, they don't understand that problem. And that's on us, because we are playing the game from behind. We almost always are reactive. And so, my counsel to everyone is to be part of an alliance like you guys have that represents your sector of the community, that can answer those questions, can be the authority. And I found that, once you start talking to someone on town council about things that are important to you, they're sincere people too. They don't want to jump the gun. So you're going to get on their Rolodex. If somebody wants to change some of the regulations about short-term rentals, in most instances, if they have a go-to person that they can call and get the other side of the story, they're going to take the time to do that. But way too often, they are only hearing one side of the story. And I could sit here for a couple of days and tell you stories of how many unfair regulations have passed and how they were initiated and the self-interest of the people who pushed the regulations in the beginning. But again, we need to have a seat at the table, and that begins with every person that's renting an individual home, and in particularly the case of property managers who are renting many homes. It needs to. I often say that regulation is the greatest threat to the short-term rental industry, and I sincerely believe that that's true. We're going to get through the ups and downs of the economy. We're even going to get through pandemics and things like that. But regulations can really kill your business very quickly, and I've personally seen reductions and bannings in places that took down the value of companies by 50% overnight because 50% of their inventory was outlawed. These were companies that were heritage companies, family built, intended to be passed on to family or to be sold at some point, and all that effort to modernize, build value, to be competitive, to be good citizens, to be good business people went down the tubes overnight on a single vote. So I do believe that regulation is the greatest threat to our industry, and my counsel is be involved. Form a local alliance before the problem happens, and make this part of your business plan. You're going to have to invest some money. You're going to have to invest your time, effort, energy to represent and protect the interest of your business. And that's my little spiel.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
I have one question. How like right now, Asheville bans short-term rentals. There's discussion within the county one day that they might want to regulate it. We do have a strong hoteliers association here. Do you see organizations like us being more proactive and going to talk to the commissioners and helping, even though it's not imminent, helping draft an initial regulations? And specifically like going to hoteliers association and say, what are your concerns, and talking to the county commission, coming up with like a common sense regulation, or should we wait until they get more serious?
I'm for taking the proactive approach, because oftentimes what you find before you hear about it or even invited to the table, there's enough momentum going the opposite direction that it's really hard to turn. There's an instance in Galveston, Texas, and we in the government affairs circles we call it the Galveston miracle, because they actually took that first part and proactively, before regulation was on the table, they formed citizen groups and actually formed an advisory council to the city council to take a look at short-term rentals, how they could be a positive impact on the community. And they brought people who were adamantly opposed to short-term rentals into that group. They brought property managers in, they brought homeowner associations in, and they brought compliance officers in from the city. And they spent over 6 months really studying the problem. And what they found is that when you're sitting around the table, you certainly can have your differences, but you tend to be more open to another person's point of view. And they found, and they put together a set of rules that is almost I think the gold standard for the rest of the country. Some of the things people would fight in other places, they'd say, we're not going to do that, but they were proactive and said, look, we want these people to enjoy the quality of life that they've invested here. And just because they're next to a short-term rental doesn't mean that should change. Let's do what we can to address their complaints. So they address things like parking. They address things like noise complaints and having people on call. And quite honestly, it's been in place for a couple of years now, and it's still the best example that I've come across. So my answer is yes, be proactive. Let's get in front of this before we have to be reactive and we're addressing a situation that's been brought up because there's a bunch of noisy complainers, and truthfully, in almost every one of these instances, it's a minority group that's that initiates the regulations, and oftentimes they think they're sincere, but they're completely insincere. They will use affordable housing as one of their pillars to stand on, when oftentimes they've never been involved in affordable housing before. And once the issue is passed and the regulation is gone, none of them get involved in that. We had a case in Oregon where a referendum banning short-term rentals went to referendum, and we won. And that group they built their case on affordable housing. None of them are involved in any affordable housing efforts now. They've just kind of tucked their tail between their legs and accepted that they lost the battle. But the issues that they were bringing to the table, they haven't taken any initiative to help with. So, yes, get ahead of it.
Scott, thanks for being here.
Delighted to.
How important is it for people with an interest in STRs, owners, property managers, cleaning service people to show?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and more, quite honestly, I'm finding that if you lose the battle in the beginning, or it's going against you, it can become very, very expensive. And as a professional property manager, I just quite honestly did not care for, owner rented properties, or property, not non-property managers, somebody who was renting just their own home, because oftentimes we had to deal with issues that were coming from those places, and people mistook them for our homes. And I just didn't feel like they put a professional product out there. So I was opposed to them. And so I didn't look to them as part of my constituency. Now I will tell you, you have to look to everybody as part of your constituency, because if you ever find yourself in having to go to court to challenge a regulation that's been passed, and as I mentioned earlier, many of these regulations are not founded on sound legal principle, and they are challengeable in court, but it's expensive. And you need those individual homeowners to participate, because, they really have the most at stake here. They are owning $1 million properties that they invested in and counted on the short-term rentals to make those payments. And so they've got a lot at stake, and you need to make them your allies. Often you have a somewhat different perspective, but you need to have as broad a constituency as you possibly can.
What other questions?
I have a good one. State preemption laws. Do you see them working? Do you see them being rolled back? And in your opinion, is there any legs to a potential North Carolina preemption bill that may be on the table?
So I didn't hear the question completely. I heard the topic preemption bills. And were you specifically speaking about North Carolina?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll enunciate a little better. Do you see them working in other states? And in your opinion, could one that's being proposed in North Carolina eventually pass? Do you have any?
Yeah, so preemption bills are the gold standard, and it would certainly make my life easier, because you wouldn't be fighting your battleground on thousands of different places. You'd be fighting them in 50 places. But preemption bills, there's only a few of them across the country, and often those are even watered down. We had an initiative this spring to put forward a stronger preemption bill. There are preemption aspects built into North Carolina government, but not as strong as we would hope or like. But here, every one of those battles, and there's some active ones in Texas and Florida, Florida has a preemption bill, but it has a lot of exceptions, so it doesn't have as much teeth. And in fact, Florida, you shouldn't be afraid of your local government. Who you really need to be afraid of there is your HOA, because they are so prevalent there and they're under nobody's authority. So if a HOA passes something, you almost have no recourse other than to change the board of directors if you possibly can. But preemption bills are the gold standard, because basically, for those who aren't familiar with that concept, it takes away the authority of local governments to zone or to enact certain types of regulations. And in our concern, that would be to zone single family residences and regulate them differently than they would any other rental property, whether it was long-term, short-term, or otherwise. And so they preempt that privilege to the state. So the state is the only one that would have that authority. But towns and cities are very, very protective of the authority that they have, and tend to fight tooth and nail when preemption comes. We had a preemption bill before the Texas legislature for 3 years in a row, and we thought we were getting close and that it was going to pass this year, and at the last minute a backdoor deal was made and it was tabled, and it was tabled effectively enough that I don't even know that there will be another initiative next year. So I would support any preemption bill that we can get out there, but it is a ton of work, because you're typically fighting every town, city, and county in a state who wants to retain their authority.
A great question by Julie.
We'll talk about that in a moment, Julie. That's our agenda. There's a local town called Weaverville where they're talking about doing regulations, and Matt's going to report out on that. Any other questions for Scott? This has been perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Scott, I've got a quick question. Do you think there's a benefit of actually sitting down with people in the industry, local industry here?
100%, I do. I think that there's common ground that can be found in almost anything. I guess I'm a proverbial optimist, but I find that there's high potential for good and very low potential for making the circumstance worse. So, it's hard to go after someone when you can put a face to it and know that person is a business owner trying to support his family, trying to make his payroll, their payroll, that, they're supporting the community and lots of different ways, and way more so than the direct impact our industry has, just all the ancillary businesses that we support. Telling our story is really the first step. And then listening is also, I guess, parallel to that, listening to what the issues are on the other side, because oftentimes, and more often than not, there's a resolution and a common ground that we can come to.
Thanks.
And I'm happy to answer questions as long as anybody would want, but I do want to say that Chip can share my information with anybody, and Habit has hired me to help wherever I can. There's no qualification that you have to be an Inhabit client. And actually, we're even a little bigger than Chip described. We own 40 companies that are all technology and service companies to property managers. About a third of those are in the short-term rental business. The others are in commercial and residential sectors, but we want to be part of the solution, and there are a ton of resources that we haven't had an opportunity to get in there. into in this conversation that I can direct people to. There are archives that VRMA has of affordable housing studies, economic impact studies, cost of compliance studies, just people who have been in similar situations that can talk you through things. There's advice on how to form a local alliance and a nonprofit. Inhabit will support will build and support the website pro bono for any local alliance, and so we're happy to do that for anybody who asks us. So, and there are other groups out there that deserve a lot of credit. Rent Responsibly is a group that helps people form local alliances and administrate them. The Expedia group has a robust government affairs group. And so there are any number of resources out there. And I'm happy to help anyone or direct you to the best person to help.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Well, I'll put your email address in the chat if that's it.
Great.
Anything else? Thank you, Scott. You're welcome
Thanks,
to listen,
Scott.
but I know you got other things going on. So
Thank you. I'll excuse myself, and you guys enjoy the rest of your meeting, and thank you for the opportunity.
thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
That was good. It's good that we're on the right track too with what we're doing with all these things. And we've, I don't, some of the folks that are involved may be new, but I mean, on this thing may be new, but we did an economic impact study that's on the website, our trust. You can just Google SDR Trust, but it's economic impact study. And it also is a study done on affordable housing that we had done. And at the time, less than 3% of the housing stock in Buncombe County was short-term rentals. And the study could not find a direct correlation between the number of short-term rentals and the cost of the increase in prices of homes. There has to be some correlation, but they couldn't find it statistically significant.
Is it 35% of revenue for TDA that is it?
Yeah, 35% of the occupancy tax collected in Buncombe County comes from short-term rentals. So, Matt, you want to go next? Is that okay?
Sure. So,
Do you need this yet?
No, that's fine. So a couple of things that we talked about in our education and advocacy committee meeting, and I was hoping Scott would speak to it. I don't know, but Senate Bill 667 is the bill I was kind of alluding to. Senator Moffitt proposed it in April in the long session of the legislature. Because there's a monetary component, it's still alive for consideration through the short session, which is next year. So still on the table. Obviously, as Scott said, preemption bills are very, very difficult to get passed. And let me back up a little bit. The way the bill would work is it would say, local governments, you cannot ban short-term rentals. Here's how you can regulate them, X, Y, Z. So that is what the bill proposes. Obviously there were a lot of other issues that the legislature was dealing with, so it didn't get a lot of movement in the long session, but our lobbyists at the state association said that the very end of the session, it started to get some traction. Senator Moffitt was able to get some meetings with other influential legislators and stakeholders. And so there's some positive feelings for that gaining some traction in the short session next year. So we shall see. A couple of local things I wanted to talk about, and I will say, and we need to reiterate this, especially given that Brownie Newman's not going to run again, but we actually sat down with him last year and showed him a model ordinance, showed him our study, talked with him about it. I think there are some things we can do to get in the ears of some of the commissioners on that again. But we're very much a part of that conversation. Also, the county did the comprehensive plan recently, and the next step is some text amendments on zoning, including possible STR regulations. We had a couple of people from the planning department here a few months ago for a lunch and learn on that topic, and they reiterated that we have a seat at the table. So we will be involved in that when it comes up for discussion within the planning department. So we're in early on. Again, when it does come up for consideration by the planning board and then the commissioners, I can't reiterate enough how important you all will be, Buncombe County residents, in reaching out to them to extol the virtues of the short-term rental industry. So thank you in advance. Pretty big win in Madison County recently. I don't know if everyone saw this, but they removed a restriction. It used to be that you couldn't have a short-term rental larger than 1,200 square feet. They removed that, thankfully. There was also some road requirements that were pretty onerous that they also removed. So that was a pretty big win in Madison County. And I can send you an article on that and refer you to those changes if you're interested. I sent something out to the Alliance when it passed about a month ago. So a couple of other recent changes. Brevard. So we were involved in that process very early. Chip mentioned our economic and housing impact study for Buncombe. We actually got one for the Brevard area as well and provided it to the task force that was convened to look at that issue. I truly believe that coupled with some of our STR Alliance folks showing up to those task force meetings helped in minimizing the ordinance that was eventually passed. It wasn't ideal, but it was definitely better than what we've seen in Asheville or Woodfin. So they are prohibiting them in 2 zoning districts going forward, general residential zoning districts, but they are explicitly allowing existing ones as a legal non-conforming use, so grandfathered in, so to speak. They're allowing them in ADUs as long as the property owner is on site. And then they're allowed in all other zoning districts. So again, there was talk of banning them much more wholesale the way Asheville has done. So I'm proud of our involvement in that process.
So ADUs attached and unattached? Correct. With kitchens?
Yeah, I don't think there's any weird esoteric kitchen rule like Asheville. So that's Brevard. That was passed in August. So, just be aware going forward, dealing with clients that does exist now. Weaverville. Okay, so we've also gotten in early in Weaverville. They started discussions, I would say, kind of in earnest in April. It's still with the planning board. I'm kind of looking up at Julie here behind the PowerPoint. So we've been identified as a stakeholder, we meaning LOTSAR and this alliance. Now, I also sent to the director of the planning department and the chair of the planning board model ordinance and our Buncombe County economic impact and housing impact study. So they have that. Now, they did specifically request that a Weaverville resident be the official mouthpiece as the stakeholder. So naturally, we chose our legislative chair. His name's Nick Hinton. He's been very involved in legislative and short-term rental stuff for the last several years. So he'll be a great advocate for that. My understanding is beginning at the planning board's December meeting is when they're going to start getting input from the public and from STR stakeholders. So, just know I'm going to those meetings and I'll update the alliance, once we get some information. But once again, Julie, to your point, thank you for bringing it up. Anybody who is either a Weaverville realtor or has an interest in STRs in Weaverville, please consider coming to those meetings, giving comment when the time comes. Again, the more voices we have supporting STRs, the better likelihood of defeating overly onerous regulations.
Yeah, was good.
Correct. Yeah. And then finally, Black Mountain, and this is a credit to Chip. I'm going to brag on him a little bit. He showed up in a meeting in, I think, April or March and gave a great presentation to demonstrate that SCRs, stuff Scott was saying, they're not the culprit for affordable housing issues. They're very positive in a lot of ways for the area. And so as a result of that and other people weighing in, Black Mountain for the time being has decided to do very, very minimal, again, stuff that quite honestly we're okay with. Having a contact person within 60 miles. Scott mentioned something similar to that in his presentation. Requiring an initial permit and inspection, but it's actually illegal to do annual inspections and permits now in North Carolina because of the Schroeder case in Wilmington from a few years ago. So that will be pretty minimal in Black Mountain, again, for the time being. So, any questions?
Black Mountain was just like Scott said. I mean, I happen to know that it's a small town, so I know that people on those calls and people talk about short-term rentals. It's because I had a relationship with them. That worked out really well. And your mom and there's a lot of interest in that. I need to put up. You want to go, but I also need to put in the. We can just email Scott's contact information.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just email Scott Leggett's contact information. So we'll have Mark now talk to us.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If I can make a PowerPoint more exciting than Matt and Scott, that's my goal.
Very low bar, at least for me.
Well, I don't know. You did a great job, Matt. How do I push forward?
Right here.
Okay. So I just wanted to show some things. First, yeah. Kind of from a regional standpoint, what's going on with the industry in terms of adjusted paid occupancy. And this comes from Key Data Dashboard, which is a great platform. We use it a lot. I'm with Yonder, and I'm pretty sure Chip probably uses Key Data as well. Adjusted paid occupancy is basically occupancy from guests. It's not owners or free stays from family or friends. And you can see across the country, but specifically in the Southeast where we are, that we've seen a decrease in occupancy this year, especially in the third quarter, but really the whole year, I would say, Chip. It's still a little above 2019. That's what we're going to, I think, see the rest of the year. And we kind of think that 24 is going to be very similar. You can see where COVID really made a huge impact on the business in a positive way. And even last year, we did very well. So as an industry, it's same sort of things happen also with daily rates. In the Southeast, slightly down from last year, certainly a lot higher than it was in 2019, which is a good thing. The other, I think, important element to this is the supply. Supply has really changed the face of the industry, not just here in the Southeast, but all over the country, is what I'm hearing from a lot of other PMs. So, and that's been, also the travel trends have also changed. People are going to Europe. Hotels are doing better. Airlines are busy. Cruise ships are busy. So generally the whole, I think, landscape is shifting a little bit. And if we go to really think a little bit more specific to Asheville, this is coming from AirDNA. Not one of my favorite platforms, but certainly something if we follow consistently, at least we have a benchmark. And right now they're saying 27 plus SDRs, although if we looked at 10% are private rooms, so it's really kind of hard to say if they are managed or if they fall under that esoteric, rules for Asheville. I think what I was looking at is really the growth in the last 3 years of SDRs, and you can see, it's definitely taken off, and little ups and downs, but typically it's on a growth pattern, and we'll see how it goes. I think again, this last year you'll see all of the major KPIs in a slight negative, and that reflects the Southeast region. And again, from everyone I talk to around the country, it's pretty much the same situation, although I do think that the Southeast has fared a lot better than other parts of the country. Any questions on these graphs right now? Okay, so let's move on. One of the things we've been talking about in the executive committee is other resources, and the VRMA, and Scott mentioned VRMA in his talk. VRMA is Vacation Rental Management Association. Been around a long time, national. I think they even have some international footprint as well. And one of Yonder's a member, pretty sure Chip is, and I'm sure a bunch of other PMs that might be on the call are. They're a really good resource, and they do a lot of conferences. And one of the discussions was, do we as an alliance want to become an associate member? It's about just under $1,000 a year. And what I wanted to do is go over briefly what they could offer us. So their website, Advocacy and Government Affairs, we would be a VRMA member, and there would be a lot of resources that we would be able to access. Basically, I don't know if everyone can read that. Our toolkit offers you the resources and tools that will assist you as you engage with policymakers in your area. We have case studies, sample email outreach, best practices, and more. Explore our resources and stay ahead of adverse and restrictive regulations. National housing study, a lot of talking points, a lot of things we could do with social media. Again, I'm not going to read this verbatim, and we can share this with all the members. The affordable housing study, really interesting stuff. I know we've done one here, and I'm showing a California slide. VRMA just a couple weeks ago at the International VRMA conference said that the next study they were going to do is for North Carolina, which is going to be great. I think it's going to be really helpful for us. But again, economic impact studies, marketing resources, government affairs, I think is going to be really important for us. A lot of resources there. Issue tracking. We can look at any state and see what they're doing, but we can also look at North Carolina. And I spoke to, what was his name from VRMA? Nick. Spoke to him recently, and I said, hey, can you just send me at least what you have for North Carolina? So there's some good stuff that we can look at, what's going on locally. There's just a lot of great information. Again, this is minutia, but I think important. So I guess that's I don't know if there's any questions on that, but I wanted to, about a month ago, I said I was going to come in here and show Matt this specifically, and I was really busy, man. Sorry. So I thought, well, this might be a good opportunity to show everyone and answer any questions. Start the discussion, see what everyone thinks. Again, $995 a year. Personally, I think it's a great idea. I think there's a lot of good resources. Pardon?
Maybe we put $250.
We'll do 250. Is we'll
Where's
match.
500? Do I have 750?
Okay.
We'll be in
We got
touch.
the well first. Do we have a budget?
I'm sure we can come in.
Yeah. No, we'd contribute.
I think we should. We also got a grant from the, to do a video, which we're in the process of finalizing.
That's what I want to ask Scott. It's great.
You have the originals, right?
Yeah.
So I talked with the guy, the other night when we were at the opening, there's a video guy who will do it.
Oh, cool.
So I can get those from you and get him the quote to strip out the stuff. you want.
Yeah, and I've talked to B-Clip as well, and I'm waiting for them to get me a quote.
Let's just compare.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good idea. All right.
Any questions from we got 2 minutes more. If you, do you mind? Showing that.
All right, thanks.
I'm seeing inventory dropping. I feel like inventory is short from now. I don't know. I hear
From your portfolio.
They're all going to Young. Yeah, we just, our long-term
Converting
department
to
is getting a lot of people that are doing short-term on their own.
I think it's gonna adjust, but it's just gonna be a little slower.
The other thing that the property managers now, I think I was going to talk to you all about was key data. We met with Vic Isley at the TDA, and it's really hard to get data for short-term rentals, and they use AirDNA, which frustrates the heck out of me because it scrapes websites. So it shows our occupancy at like 40, 50% in January when I know it's not. But that's when we winterize houses. That's when owners are there. And key data is great because it ties in directly into our software for property manager software. So and we were talking about, and she has an account with key data. And instead of them showing at the TDA meeting occupancy at 40% in January, I would love for her to have access to to key data. So that the occupancy is 20% or whatever it really is. So I'll be in touch with some of the property management companies to see if they're willing to put their name in. I know Yonder's there, Baker's there. And then just real quick, this is one of the study that was done by Oxford Economics on a national level by Burma. And we did one a couple of years ago, but we're going to have to do something again in a couple of years or whenever. And I thought this one was really good because it says basically there's been a 32% increase in the price of housing since 2014 to 2021. They can contribute 0.4% of that to short-term rentals. And then the other thing is we're taking away from long-term rentals, and that has grown 9.4%, and short-term rentals represents 0.5%. So the average price since 2014, from 2015 to 2021, of a house has gone up $800 because of short-term rentals, and the average house on the national level of rent for long-term has gone up $5 because of short-term. I thought that was a good study.
And Mark, you said they're going to do a North Carolina specific one next year. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll find out the timing on it, but that's their next big project. Cool. So yeah.
Anything else? We welcome feedback and suggestions and speakers and whatever. We're trying to have this quarterly, and we welcome feedback. Thank you all for being here. Oh, we have some chat. Anything in chat?
I got a copy of it.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate y'all.